May you live in interesting times. We are all familiar with this blessing that is often used as a curse, and we are certainly living in interesting times. This year has been both a blessing and a curse. The curse is obvious. We have all suffered through this pandemic, but we haven't all suffered equally. Some have lost loved ones or watched family members suffer illness and financial ruin. But all of us in this pandemic have been pushed out of our comfort zone, and that has been in part a blessing. When we're pushed out of our comfort zone, we tend to grow. I have witnessed this in my own family. We're more gentle with each other, more mindful. When we interact with others, we seem to be more concerned about their welfare. It is certainly a curse that we cannot all be together tonight to celebrate your great accomplishment. You have done the unthinkable, gone back to school, and at your age. I can't imagine how hard it must have been to balance your day job, your family, your financial obligations, as well as your MSSE classes. I stand in awe of each and every one of you. I really don't think that I could have done it myself. Even though we're far apart, we'd like to take a moment and just pause and treasure this accomplishment. This evening is all about you. We're going to begin this celebration by living vicariously through our own John Graves. Last year, the MSSE program sent John to Nepal to find himself. We sent John, we just didn't pay for his trip. We're going to travel with John for about 17 minutes. I understand this is the average length of a trek in Nepal. And after that, it will be our honor to present the graduates. So now I give you our own intrepid explorer, John Graves.
This is my story of my love affair with mountains. Even as a young kid, I remember I loved to climb things. I loved to be outdoors. That's a picture of us on the left-hand side climbing Soda Butte in Yellowstone Park. Don't tell anybody that picture exists. On the right-hand side are my sister and me in the Beartooths, in our patent leather shoes on some snow and ice. Even as I got older and joined Scouts, I enjoyed being outside. Late in my teens and early 20s, I spent a lot of time in the Beartooth Mountains, climbing, hiking around, just enjoying being outside and seeing what mountains had to offer. That resulted in attempts on Mount Rainier and other mountain peaks around Montana. Even after I became a teacher, I enjoyed taking students into the outdoors and sharing with them the things that I had learned and creating more memories and more adventures. These are pictures of us in Yellowstone Park. In the upper right-hand corner is Specimen Ridge. We climbed up and took a look at some of the standing petrified trees there. Even today, I find myself on field study courses, supporting students, supporting instructors. As a background and introduction to my study, I noticed all the way back in 2011, as I looked at some of my personal inventory goals, that one of those goals was to trek in Nepal. And that leads me to the question that I studied for this research, and that is, what are the effects of a trek in Nepal on an MSSE core instructor? Well, like all good action research studies, I needed to start taking a look at what the literature had to say about where I was going. So after we booked with a trekking company in Nepal, we began to review the materials that they sent us. We ordered maps, we began to study some of the information about the area, and even connected with professionals in the field. That's Dave Laugesen, image down in the right-hand side. And Dave had been to Nepal several times, and so my trekking buddies and I took Dave out to lunch and listened to him as he shared of some of the things that we would encounter and gave us some tips and tricks as we prepared for our trek. In terms of preparing for the trek, I spent all of 2019 getting ready to go. So that included skiing, bike riding, hiking, and the upper right-hand photo is a picture of me after I fell off a log as I was hiking early last summer. That could have been a career-ending injury, but fortunately I landed in the creek bed, got soaking wet, gashed my leg, but it wasn't as serious as it appears right there. Along the way, I was keeping track of my efforts in terms of training. My goal was to climb about 10,000 feet of elevation every week. Some weeks I made it and some weeks I didn't. I used an app on my phone to collect data as I was preparing for the trek. This is the route that we took when we were in Nepal. We landed at Lukla, which is at the bottom of this map. We went up that red trail, and where it splits up above, we went left up to a village called Gokyo. From there, we crossed over Chola Pass down to Lobishe, and then we took that right-hand spur in the upper right-hand corner of the map up to a village called Gorak Shep. From there, we went to Everest Base Camp, and then we climbed a high prominence called Kalapatar, and then our return was down the right-hand side of that till it met the main trail again, and we came back to Lukla. Now, Lukla is considered by many people to be the most dangerous airport in the world. It sits at just over 9,000 feet. When a plane lands here, that runway is about 1,700 feet long. It needs to land and make a turn at the top of the runway. You land uphill. That helps slow your speed down when you land. There's a retaining wall at the top of the runway, so if the airplane doesn't make the turn, it will eventually stop. So this is what the landing looks like. Everything above Lukla is foot traffic only. There are no motorized vehicles, with the exception of helicopters from time to time that are flying up and down. So once you leave Lukla, you're on the track, and you're going to see everything has been moved by people or by animals. And I don't want to do that. Some of the claims I am going to make as a result of my study are connections to MSSE courses. So a connection to wildlife ecology are some of the animals that we encountered. This is a Himalayan musk deer. These guys are running around in small herds. They're rather curious animals, and so we encountered those along the track. These are yaks. These are domesticated animals found generally above 14,000 feet in elevation. And as you can see, they're transporting materials along the trail. At lower elevations, we encountered mule trains. We were told as we were trekking that we always wanted to stay on the uphill side of the trail. When animals are on the trail, they believe that they own it, and it's not uncommon for people to be bumped off the trail if you're on the downhill side. In fact, the first day that we were trekking, we heard a report of a trekker who had been knocked off the trail and killed, so we did take that warning very seriously. A connection to other MSSE courses are birds. There are eagle-type birds in Nepal. There are crows. This is called a Tibetan snowcock, and it was found at a fairly high elevation. This is a rufous-breasted sparrow. The ecology was absolutely amazing. This is a freshwater lake that has been supplied by its water source from glacier melt. This is one of the Gokyo lakes. On the right-hand side, that plant is an incense. You could smell that plant as you were hiking. It had a sweet smell to it that was actually very pleasant. Again, just some of the ecology and the views that we encountered every day. Because of the glaciers in that area, there's an awful lot of water, so a connection to watershed hydrology. We had to cross many of those rivers, In many cases, we crossed on a bridge that had been placed there. In other times, we just forded the stream, depending upon where we were. Connections to engineering were seen everywhere. Materials that you encountered or saw at the higher villages were taken there either by people or by animal. So engineering projects took on whatever materials they had handy. This was a bridge that was wiped out during an early spring runoff, and so you can see the materials that are being used to reconstruct that bridge. This is a typical suspension bridge across one of the river valleys. As we were crossing these suspension bridges, we had to be careful because even if we were halfway or 3/4 of the way across and an animal train was coming at us, we turned around and went back the other way so we didn't encounter an animal train on the suspension bridge. As I mentioned, materials are transported up and down the trails by people. This is a very typical setup for a porter who is carrying materials. You notice that they have a strap that they place over their forehead, and that's where the bulk of the load rests. And this is a porter carrying probably a hospital bed, and we gave him the entire berth of the suspension bridge because his wide load took up all of that space. Connections to earth science were obviously everywhere. This is a sunset view of one of the mountains that we saw near Mount Everest Base Camp. The geology was incredible. This is a glacier that we were crossing, and you can see the glacial debris from the action of the glacier carving the mountains around it, carrying and transporting those materials down the valley. We encountered a couple of women from England, and they called this the quarry. So we jokingly said every time we crossed a glacier, we were crossing the quarry. Just another view of the glacial ice. And there's glacial ponds down below there, and then the glacial material that's been transported off the mountains. This is a picture of my trekking buddies and me at Everest Base Camp. That black rock in the center of the photo just below that cloud is actually Mount Everest. That's as close as we were able to get to it. It's buried, in a sense, behind the mountains in front of it, so it doesn't seem prominent from this viewpoint, from this vantage point. Again, just evidence of earth science. Connections to land resources are just simply how people use the land. It was not uncommon to see people washing in streams like this. There were times when our porters and guide would disappear when we stopped somewhere for lunch, and they would come back 20, 30 minutes later, and their hair would be wet and their clothes would be wet because they sneaked off and found a stream like this and took a bath. Unfortunately, there were places where trash was just dumped on the ground. There is an effort now to pick up trash along the trails, but you do see lots of litter. But when people do pick up the trash, they're put in that structure down in the right-hand corner, and then some folks come by, gather that all up, and take it to a place lower down in the trail. And then as we hiked out, we were asked if we wanted to carry a 1 kilogram bag of trash down to Lukla, where it was gathered throughout the season and eventually sent down to Kathmandu, where it was processed more properly. Another land resource use is yak dung. This was gathered off the trail, and in this case it was put up against this retaining wall to be dried because that's used for fuel to run stoves that are in the tea houses where we stayed. This is a typical tea house, and you can see that the tables are along the outside walls of the tea house, and we would gather there for our meals. And then you can see all the trekkers are gathered and just spending, whatever leisure time we have. We played a lot of cards. Those are those two ladies from England. They were impressed by the large M&M bag from Costco. Our meals were a lot of rice and beans and soup. This is a typical breakfast. It's a Tibetan bread and eggs. This is where we stayed, in a tea house. These rooms had bunks in them, and we just put our sleeping bags on top of the bunks. There was no heat in any of the places where we stayed, but with our sleeping bags and the other clothes that we had with us, we were never cold in any regard. Another connection to MSSE courses are flowering plants. There were a lot of plants, and I'm sorry, Robin, but I didn't learn the names of any of them. But even along the track where we got closer to houses and villages, people were planting flowers. Back in Kathmandu, we encountered our physics by inquiry, our electric circuits. It was interesting. Soon after I took this photo, there was a guy standing on a ladder playing with some of the wires that were in this mess, and how he knew what he was doing was beyond me. Farther up, when we were trekking, there was solar power. There was also hydroelectric power to a certain level of the mountain, and then beyond that, it was all solar. In terms of plants, people, and health, we did encounter some little children along the way, but they weren't at the higher elevations. But kids are kids, regardless where you are in the world, finding something to play with. This is a typical traffic scene in Kathmandu. Kathmandu has about 2.5 million people. Another street scene in Kathmandu. As I reflect on my experience in Nepal, and I try to put everything together in a claim, evidence, reasoning statement, I have some takeaways from the trip that I want to share with you. First and foremost, I'm so thankful to live where I live, to be able to experience the mountains around here, and yet have had the opportunity to explore mountains elsewhere around the world. Secondly, I remember one thing that Dave Lageson told us when we met with him about a year ago preparing for this trip. And he said that Nepal grows on you. At the time, I didn't think much of that statement. But since I've been back and had daily reflections on my time in Nepal, it is so true. Nepal is a country that has truly grown on me. I'm so impressed by the people there, the culture, the fact that they can take minimal resources and make things work for themselves. There are no traffic lights, there are no stop signs in the city of Kathmandu, and yet they make traffic work. When we got into those higher villages along the track, they were able to use the resources that the folks had available to them, and they simply made it work. They're a happy people, and my heart grieves for them now in the midst of this pandemic, because all trekking and all climbing has completely shut down in the country for this entire year, and that is, for many people, their primary source of income. I'm reminded of a very famous quote by John Muir, who said, "The mountains are calling and I must go." But there's more to that quote, and it reads like this: "The mountains are calling and I must go, and I will work on while I can, studying incessantly." That statement reminds me of one of the goals that we have for MSSE students, and that is to be lifelong learners. So regardless of what mountains are calling you, I encourage you to go, and I encourage you to continue to work on while you can, studying incessantly, because that's the spirit of MSSE, that we all become lifelong learners. So that's the end of one adventure, but I know for me, it's only the beginning of others. I hope that that's the same for you as well. Thank you.
A truly great mentor is hard to find, difficult to part with, and impossible to forget. This quote truly embodies Dr. Peggy Taylor. Fittingly, the author is anonymous, further suggesting the joy of mentorship is not found in being in the spotlight, but helping someone else get there. Peggy elevated those around her by illuminating the best parts of them and challenged them to see every accomplishment as a stepping stone on a larger path to bigger goals. When I graduated from the MSSE program in 2012, Peggy encouraged me to get my doctorate and return to the program as an instructor. And at that time, she had larger goals for me than I had for myself. One of our current MSSE graduates supports students in her school district not only by vetting the best curriculum, but by listening and showing a strong awareness of their individual talents each one brings to their science teaching. She leads by example. She has extremely high standards for herself and enjoys the important part of elevating science teachers, showing them their influence on the next generation of scientists. Perhaps more importantly, she is aware of the charge to ensure those students who may not choose science careers become citizens who are scientifically literate and curious about their world. It is with great pleasure that I present this award to Aaron Hunt.
Edgar Naskar once wrote, "Be a glass of water and quench the thirst of others." Our former director, the late Dr. Peggy Taylor, emphasized that component of graduate work. Graduates sharing information with each other. It was a very difficult choice to decide on one colleague that would be deserving of an award. I had 15 students that shared daily top ideas and top things that were going on. So I went through several classes, counting quantitatively all the data and qualitatively counting all the data. And Neil Freeman exemplified that as he continually provided ideas, resources, and online discussion work. If a colleague posted a discussion, Neil was there within the hour, giving examples, giving resources, giving things that happened. It is for this reason that Neil has earned the Dr. Peggy Taylor Exemplary Student Award.
I don't know if I can complete this program. I have so many questions. Is it okay to text or call you? With that request, a journey began. A journey in which a motivated MSSE student decided she could complete the program and earn her degree. As a second language learner, writing in English at the graduate level was challenging, but she was determined to rise to that challenge just as she had challenged her students to work through their adversities of learning chemistry. With a love for her students like Mother Teresa's, she implemented blended learning in her classroom, providing more opportunities for active learning. Through the process, her students grew in their understanding of science content. And through the process, Perla Garcia grew as a teacher, proving once again that the secret to success is hard work, preparation, learning through failure, and finishing the race. Anne Sullivan said, "My heart is singing for joy this morning. A miracle has happened. The light of understanding has shone upon my pupil's mind, and behold, all things are changed." Perla, you have changed. Not only changed yourself, but your students and me. Congratulations on being recognized as a recipient of the Dr. Peggy Taylor Exemplary Student Award.
We've come to the end of the formal part of our graduation ceremony, but we hope that you continue to celebrate with your family. At this point, if you had been here with us, we'd be cutting the cake and taking pictures. We hope that you have some sort of dessert to share with your family and that you are basking in their approval right now. Please remember the sacrifice that they made, your children, your spouse, your parents, as you went through this difficult process, and give them a hug. Know that we are proud of you. As you go out into the world and make a difference, know that you represent not only your family and your community, but the MSSE program, and that makes us happy. Thanks for joining us this evening. Bye.
Take a picture and send it to us.